Have you ever heard something strange while the rain was falling outside? In this video, dive into real horror stories. Get ready for authentic and terrifying accounts that will make you question every sound and shadow around you. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Let's move on to the first story.
I've been working for a crime scene cleanup company for about 5 years. I can't reveal the name because there aren't many such organizations in my state, nor will I disclose the area of the city where my encounters occurred. I'm not sure if I could get into trouble with the local police department, but I'd rather not take the risk. Our job includes homicides, suicides, tenant deaths, and blood bioremediation. Essentially, we clean up after any type of death or murder. The incident I'm going to share with you happened during my first year on the job. At that time, we were assigned partners to help us clean the scene. Jackson, a 25-year-old African-American man, was my first partner. Jackson was a really cool guy, had an air of confidence, and nothing really scared him. Being new to the job, his demeanor helped me immensely because I tended to get scared easily. This particular job involved cleaning a homicide scene. According to the police, 2 men had been executed in a style execution. When Jackson and I arrived at the crime scene, the detectives were leaving through the door. Jackson went in first, looked around, came out, smiled, and said, "Those were some sick bastards." Upon entering the living room, I could smell the familiar odor of blood. If you've never been close to fresh blood, it smells like old socks, and I'm not saying that to be funny. Over the years, I've developed the ability to describe the many smells of crime scenes. Anyway, back to the story. When I entered the living room, there were 2 outlines showing where the bodies had been. At the base of the wall opposite the outlines, there were splatters. Splatters is the word I use to describe almost everything. In this case, it was a mix of brain matter, blood, skull fragments, facial tissue, fecal matter, and teeth. What was strange about this scene was that someone had used a finger to draw 2 symbols in the splatters on the wall. It was the first time I had seen something like that, so I asked Jackson what he thought. His response was, "People are sick, man. They're wild." So, Jackson and I started the process of removing the remaining furniture so we could rip up the carpet in the room and take out the padding underneath. For the record, it's not like in the movies where you spray some magic solution on the carpet and just scrub away the blood. Blood soaks into carpets and even stains the concrete or wood underneath the floor. As we began cutting the carpet along the edges of the wall, Jackson stopped. His eyes were moving back and forth, as if he were searching for something. I noticed this but didn't think much of it. We continued cutting and rolling up the carpet and padding. When I dragged the carpet outside, Jackson began treating the concrete slab with a biological cleaning solution. When I came back, I saw he was still looking around. It was odd because he was usually so focused, and normally, when we did these cleanups, we were in and out in 2 hours. I started asking if everything was okay, and that's when he motioned for me to be quiet and pointed at the ceiling. There was a faint sound, like something moving in the attic. I said we should finish quickly, but Jackson headed to the back of the house. Naturally, I thought he was going to use the bathroom. Jackson had a habit of using the restroom in the strangest places. After we meticulously removed the drywall and baseboards, we began cleaning up the debris for the front yard. I was thinking he was sitting on the toilet, but when I opened the bathroom door, he wasn't there. I walked through the rest of the house, and he was nowhere to be found. Finally, I went out the back door, and there he was, standing in the yard, looking at an attic window. "Dude, what are you doing, Jackson?" He, terrified, was standing with his mouth agape, staring up. Naturally, I looked to see what he was looking at, and up there, in a small attic window, was a dim light and a silhouette moving back and forth, as if someone were slowly swaying. Jackson began to head back into the house with a determined expression. I already knew what was going to happen. He was going to go up to the attic. "Hey, Jackson, I don't think this is a good idea, man. We should call the police." "Yeah, call them," said Jackson. Jackson went straight in, opened the attic door, and started climbing the stairs. When his head was in the attic, I asked what he could see. "Blood." "What?" "Blood." He continued up into the attic, and I followed him. What I saw was horrific. A man hanging from the rafters of the ceiling, naked, with no arms or legs. He had metal rods inserted where his limbs should have been, and his body was suspended in the air by these rods. Underneath him was a pile of urine and feces. I vomited and started to feel dizzy. Jackson pulled out his cell phone and began calling the police. That's when the man started speaking slowly. The gates of hell are open and feed on the blood of dead children. Bring us your souls. It was too much for my mind. I went down the stairs and out the back door. A few minutes later, Jackson came down with the phone in his hand and said, "The police won't believe this." The worst part was that when they arrived, the first two officers questioned us as if we were suspects. Then one of the homicide detectives we knew showed up and explained that this was our job, to clean these scenes. We stayed while the paramedics removed the man from the attic. One of the paramedics said it was one of the worst things he had ever seen. What made the situation even worse was that we had to clean the attic of the house. To this day, Jackson and I still talk about those events. He calls it my initiation into the business. Not long ago, I drove by that property on my way to a Mardi Gras parade. A family lives there now. It's chilling, an entire family living in a house where there was a quadruple murder, torture, and more. They really should have investigated before buying that property.
Recently, I came across this YouTube channel and decided to share a really strange incident that happened to me a few years ago. Here's a bit of context. My sister had been living with my grandmother about a year before her death. She hadn't lived with me and my parents since she was 17. There was a significant age gap between us. At the time of this incident, I was 18 and my sister 37, when she passed away in April 2016. On my birthday, she gave me a special gift, matching necklaces, the kind that come together to form a heart or a yin and yang symbol. Hers said older sister, and mine said younger sister. She was already wearing her half of the necklace when she gave me mine. Unfortunately, in July 2016, my sister passed away suddenly due to an accidental drug overdose. She had struggled with addiction for a long time, and her death was devastating for all of us. A few weeks after her death, my mother and I went to my grandmother's house to pick up some of her belongings that we wanted. I had in mind to find the matching half of the necklace so I could have both. We searched through her things, but couldn't find it anywhere. We rummaged through her room, but it wasn't there. I was very upset about it. We had already retrieved her belongings from the corner, and she was only wearing a watch when she passed away, not a necklace. My grandmother offered to look for it, but she didn't find it either. Fast forward to December 2016, it was our first Christmas without her. As I was putting up the Christmas decorations, I cried from time to time, as that year had been terrible. When I pulled out the Christmas stockings, I found hers and decided to hang it up anyway because I missed her so much. However, when I picked up the stocking, I felt something hard at the tip. I thought it might be a gift from the previous Christmas and went to check what it was. To my surprise, it was the missing half of her necklace. I was frozen, as if I had been hit by something. I thought it might be a similar necklace, but I was horrified when I realized it said older sister. There was literally no other way for her necklace to be there. My sister wasn't allowed to be at my parents' house unsupervised, as she was known for stealing pills, and she also wasn't allowed to have a key. I'm almost sure she didn't even visit the house during the 4 months we had the necklaces before her death. Additionally, the Christmas stockings would have been stored in the garage all year, with other boxes and decorations piled on top of them. My parents and grandmother, understandably, were frightened. My mother and grandmother even cried when I told them. To this day, I can't explain how or why the necklace appeared there. I was delighted to find it, but also a bit scared. Has anyone else experienced something similar?
My girlfriend and I were returning from a long road trip. It was around 2 a.m., and we were driving down a rural road. My headlights illuminated something on the side of the road. I thought it was a sheep, so I slowed down since they can be very unpredictable when startled. As we got closer, we both saw it was a person sitting by the roadside. I slowed down even more and stopped the car. My girlfriend and I got out and asked the person if they were okay and needed help. The woman said she was lost and didn't know where she was. She seemed a bit frightened and was trembling, but she wasn't hostile. I asked where she was headed, and she mentioned the next town we would need to pass through to get home, so I offered her a ride. As we approached, I noticed she was dressed well, in brand-name hiking clothes, although without an appropriate jacket, just one of those light ones that can be easily packed. She seemed to be in good physical shape, except for the trembling. Additionally, she was clean and hygienic, not appearing to be a homeless person. However, she wasn't carrying a backpack, so she didn't have water, a map, emergency food, or a first aid kit. We helped her to her feet, and she was able to walk and appeared lucid. I didn't suspect she was under the influence of alcohol, drugs, medications, or suffering from withdrawal. I also ruled out a concussion or psychological issues, but here's where something strange happened. When we got to my car, she said she needed to relieve herself before we left and went towards the trees next to the car. After a few minutes, my girlfriend called out her name and asked if she was okay. There was no response. I took the flashlight from my car and went to look for her, but after 10 minutes, we still couldn't find her. She had simply disappeared. My girlfriend and I got back in the car and looked at each other in disbelief, trying to rationalize what had happened. We couldn't have both hallucinated at the same time. After all, we physically helped her up and talked to her. I noted the GPS coordinates of our location and reported the incident to the police station in the town she said she was heading to. We provided her name and a full physical description, left our contact details, and asked to be informed if there was any news. We never heard anything. We returned to that town about 6 weeks later and went to the police station to ask if there were any updates. Nothing. There were no sightings, no reports of a missing person matching our description, and no body was found. Nothing. We've talked about what happened many times. Maybe she had mental health issues. Maybe she got lost again and perished, or maybe she was found and returned to town. But I hope, for God's sake, that she is safe and getting all the help she might need. To start, you need a bit of context to understand how I ended up in this situation. When I finished high school around 2003, finding a job was tough, so I took any terrible job I could to survive. I landed a full-time job cleaning fire and water damage. I was excited to have a stable income and start saving, but it quickly turned into a nightmare I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for assigned me my first job, which was a water damage cleanup where a basement had been flooded with sewage. After a few days of work, we finished and moved on to the next job. The boss called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special team he was forming, asking if I wanted to be the team leader, overseeing 3 other guys who had just been hired. It seemed odd since I had only been working there for about 3 days, but I thought my work ethic was paying off and that I'd get a raise. I was only making $10 an hour at the beginning. Not only did I not get a raise, but I also didn't receive any training for the new position, other than a truck with cleaning supplies and a phone number for the 3 new hires to handle fire and water damage cleanup. The boss told me which tools were best to use, which cleaning products to use for disinfecting, and where everything was in the truck, hazardous material suits and masks. But he was vague about what kind of things I'd have to clean. He only said that situations were always different and that I'd receive detailed instructions on each job. He called me the CSC team leader. The boss told me I'd never have to see the deceased since the coroner would have already taken the remains when my team arrived, and that I should use my judgment to determine what needed to be removed from the houses and what could be cleaned. The first job in my new position, which the boss told me about when I arrived at the office, was to clean the remains of an elderly man or woman who had died in their home and was found in their chair. When we arrived, the coroner brought me in to show me some items considered hazardous materials that needed to be removed due to disease risk. I guess my boss knew some people from the county coroner's office, and a lot of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but they were also fully visible to me and the other guys, and you could smell the decomposition through the mask because the house had no air conditioning and it was mid-June. The coroner was delayed in waiting for more people to arrive to move the body, as it was decomposing. I refer to the body as it because, honestly, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. I tried not to look too long. It was quite disturbing. The other 3 guys I was working with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and had to go outside to vomit. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair and the fluids that had leaked onto the basement carpet, where the fluids had seeped through the subfloor and collected in some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support team arrived and took the body away, and my team and I began working. After about 5 minutes, strange things started happening. The first was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had removed the back of the chair and was putting it into the special hazardous material bags they gave me. The base started to sway when I was about 3 feet away, placing the bag with the chair back beside the front door. No one else was in the same room, and the other guys were in the basement moving boxes. I let it go and disassembled the chair base as much as I could. When I put it in the bag, I suddenly felt a chill on my back and started to feel unwell. I thought it was just the impact of what I was cleaning and kept going. Feeling a chill in mid-June, fully immersed in a hazardous materials suit, was definitely strange. Then, while removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it could be cleaned or if a section of the floor would need to be removed, I called the boss to ask, and he told me to just pour the cleaner over the area, let it soak into the floorboards, and it would be fine. So I took the cleaner from the truck, where he said it was, and brought it inside. When I went in, the 3 guys in the basement were trying to leave, stumbling over each other, and all ran outside. When I asked what was going on, the 3 claimed there was someone in the basement and assumed it was a homeless person or some kind of drug addict. Detroit has a lot of issues with that kind of thing. I heard from one of the open basement windows. It's the first thing we do when we start work. Open any possible window and keep the doors open, so maybe someone had entered before we arrived and was hiding. After a few minutes of hearing nothing, one of the workers and I went in, armed with a flashlight and a metal rod, and searched the basement. There was nothing there, just the footprints from the shoe covers we were wearing. But when we started to go up the stairs, we heard a horrible cough coming from somewhere in the basement. Again, nothing, but the basement corner had a lot of dust stirred up, as if someone had recently moved things, which definitely unsettled both of us. We called the other 2 to come back and take care of the boxes, but everyone kept feeling like they were being touched while handling material from the boxes with fluids. I went back to my work, but found that the cleaner I had placed beside the floorboards was now gone. I started to get a bit frustrated, as it was the only gallon of cleaner we had, and I clearly remembered placing it there before the guys ran up and my attention was diverted. So I took out the trash thinking I'd eventually find it, or that the guys from the basement had taken it to the floor. Well, I found it tipped over behind the bag with the chair back. That was impossible. There were like 6 other bags in front of that one, beside the front door, and this was a gallon of cleaner. Shortly after that, I had another one of those chills, but this one was triggered by what sounded like a whisper, though I couldn't make out the words. So, I cleaned the floorboards, took out the trash, job done. Here's another creepy part. That same night, after we got home from that job, each of us, all the members of my team, had a dream about an elderly man telling us we weren't welcome in his home, not to touch his things, and that we should leave. In my dream, I was alone inside that house. The elderly man was crying, telling me I was destroying his things he couldn't replace. He tried to push me out of his house, but it was as if I ignored him, even when he pushed me and screamed, with no reaction on my part. Then he threw my cleaner into a pile of trash I had made beside the front door, exactly where I found it the day before. 2 of the 3 guys from the team told me their dreams about the elderly man pushing them, while they were examining ruined photo boxes and other things that needed to be thrown away due to disease risk from the fluids. They also said it was as if they had no control and were on autopilot. They were sad, but couldn't do anything. What struck me the most about the other 2 guys' dreams was that both said the man got so angry that he started to cough violently, and the man kept holding their arms when they touched the boxes or threw things in the trash. None of the guys were in the house with me. When the other guy and I heard a cough in the basement, he told me he had a dream, but only remembered waking up sad, as if he had done something wrong. Suddenly, he started coughing terribly. I thought it could be a coincidence, but I couldn't help but connect it to the other dreams we all had. We talked about it and concluded that it might just be a reaction to the situation we faced, and that our brains were trying to deal with what we had experienced. As I'm very interested in psychology, I rationalized it as best I could and we moved on, hoping for better assignments the next day. The following jobs weren't as bad. We cleaned up some blood in a home invasion without victims, but with a big mess. Then we faced some bloody crime scenes with victims, but nothing noteworthy. Over time, we learned the tricks of the trade and ended up splitting into 2 teams, which I was supposed to manage as the leader. This meant I had to go to different locations if the other 2 guys had problems or didn't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job, just like the others, as we hadn't had another experience as intense as the first day. However, I was mistaken. The next job was to clean a suicide scene. The man, middle-aged, had shot himself with a large caliber gun or a shotgun, as there was blood splatter everywhere. The coroner had already removed the body, but the scene was terrible. Fragments of skull were embedded in the drywall, and there was brain matter scattered all over the basement, which seemed to be a second living room. Also, the body hadn't been found for a while, so the smell was unbearable. The first step in the cleanup was to use our backpack vacuum to remove all the dangerous biological material. The coroner told us that he and his partner felt extremely uncomfortable in the house, and we immediately started to feel claustrophobic, as if something was suffocating us. To make matters worse, the man's family was upstairs, crying, though the noise of the vacuum helped to mask it. While we were cleaning, the power was cut, and the basement went completely dark. This was odd because my vacuum kept running. Shortly after, my coworker started screaming. I turned off my vacuum and quickly went upstairs to see what was happening. I thought he might have touched a light wire or something, but when I turned off my unit, he kept screaming, and I heard things being knocked over. I started searching for my flashlight on my tool belt and shouted to ask what was going on, but only got more panicked screams in response. Then, in the darkness, I saw something even darker moving towards me. I admit I was terrified. I slipped trying to back away while still searching for my flashlight. I finally found it when my back hit the basement wall. I turned on the light and pointed it at the dark shape I had seen. And there it was, the shape of a man, with a flannel shirt, a beard, and an expression that looked ready to attack me, and then, it simply vanished. My coworker was behind where the entity had appeared, sitting on the floor, rocking back and forth with his hands on his head. As I approached, he grabbed his flashlight from the floor, turned it on, and ran upstairs to vomit. I followed him, asking if he was okay and why he was screaming. I thought I might have imagined the whole entity scene, but he told me that while he was scrubbing the wall, he felt like something was pulling at his tool belt. He thought it was me, but when he turned around, the lights went out and he was enveloped by what he described as dark smoke. Suddenly, he couldn't breathe and was struggling to move. He managed to grab his flashlight, but it was knocked out of his hand as if someone had gripped his wrist tightly. He started to scream, and that was when knickknacks from the entertainment system fell just a meter from where he was. The black smoke moved away, but he nearly fainted from the effort. He also said that he lost his hearing during the entire event, and the things that fell made him cover his head. He felt like a weight was lifted from him when the black smoke receded, but he immediately felt sick. The light from my flashlight seemed to worsen the sickness. We had an early lunch, and he just sat there, paler than ever, saying very little, just breathing. I bought him a sports drink, and his color started to return. I never told him what I saw because we still needed to finish the job, and I didn't want to put that in his head, as he never mentioned seeing anything. When we went back inside, the basement lights were on again. Half of the things that had fallen from the shelves were back in the entertainment system, and the TV was on a baseball game. There was also a different smell in the room, similar to burnt hair. My coworker stayed for another half hour, but felt ill again and went home, leaving me alone to finish the job. Although I didn't want to stay there, I had to finish since the other guys had jobs elsewhere. After cleaning everything with the vacuum, I began scrubbing the dried blood, which is difficult to remove when mixed with brain matter, becoming like glue even with the cleaner. As I finished, I kept seeing the shape of a person in my peripheral vision, and whenever this happened, I would smell that strange burnt hair smell. Sometimes, I also felt like a force was pulling at the items on my belt, but I couldn't identify which one, as there were several items there. Finally, I finished the job. I went to the bathroom upstairs in the hallway, and as I walked there, I heard a muffled crying or moaning. I was frozen. thinking it might be a family member who had returned. When I looked around, there was no one, but I saw a photo of a man with a beard, wearing a flannel shirt, and several other photos of the same man in the hallway, each in a different flannel shirt, with deer or fish for the family. Until that moment, I hadn't seen a photo of the man, as I hadn't been in any part of the house other than the basement. As I secured the house, closing all the windows, doors, and turning off the lights except for the front ones, I saw the front window curtain move, and again saw that same darker than dark shape in the window. The last experience I'll share on this topic occurred in mid-July, in a very rough area of Detroit. There was an incident where a man allegedly tried to abduct a child and was detained by local residents. These people violently beat the man, and he escaped to a house, where he was surrounded by the community until the police arrived. The crowd was furious, throwing stones through the windows and damaging the man's car. He was severely injured by the crowd and, when struck by a stone or glass, ended up dying in the house. That was the assumption of the Detroit Police Department, according to what the officer told me. The cleanup job was relatively simple. We secured the windows, cleaned blood and bodily fluids. However, as soon as I entered the house, I felt a wave of fear and sadness like I had never felt before. These sensations came in waves, weakening my legs. One of my friends, who arrived late and didn't hear the officer's story like I did, experienced the same sensations. Throughout our time there, we saw a dark figure appearing in the corners, as if watching us, and then hiding. It was similar to the previous experience, like the dark mist or smoke. We also heard faint cries for help from various areas of the house, and something that sounded like "please stop" and a long no repeated several times. The crowd outside continued to scream, and the activity in the house increased. We could hear footsteps running, doors slamming, and it seemed like the front door was opening and closing, but we never saw any doors move. The root of the footsteps seemed to come from the front door, across the living room to the bathroom, up the stairs to the attic bedroom. The part that really affected me was feeling the impacts on the floor, like the vibrations of someone running beside me while I was cleaning. Every time I heard this, a wave of fear and sadness would hit me. When we left the house, there were a few people on their porches, which is common in Detroit during the summer. They were hostile and yelled random things at us as we loaded the equipment into the truck, but we ignored them. After we loaded all the equipment and locked the door, we heard the front door slam so hard it sounded like a gunshot, startling both me and my coworker, as well as the people on the porches, who ran back into their homes. When we went to check, somehow, the latch was not locked and we couldn't open it. The sense of relief leaving that house was like night and day. Inside, I was anxious, scared, paranoid, and really depressed, but as soon as we left, it was as if a light switch had been turned on. I immediately felt better, and the other guy on my team went back to joking and laughing about the silly things we normally did, you know, the typical antics of 19 and 20-year-olds. I have many of these stories written in detail in a journal I started after the first 3 months working this job. I spoke with the other guys on the teams and got other stories from them as well. I know that some of these could very well have been formed by my subconscious to cope with traumatic situations, but some things simply have no explanation. And when I hear other team members tell their stories, without being influenced by mine, it's a completely different theme. If I have time, I'll get the journal and share more of my experiences. Things got a lot worse after I started the journal, after 3 months. I believe several of these experiences were paranormal, and many of these situations stressed my mental state to the point where my sanity mask started to unravel. In the end, I worked at that place for almost 2 years. As for the guys who were on my team, all of them died, 2 by suicide, and 1 from a drug overdose, which could have been intentional, but we'll never know. All I know is that when 3 guys of the same age, 19 and 20 years old, all normal and well-adjusted, with no worries in the world except for girls, parties, and work, I saw each of them slowly lose their joy and passion for life. I know it sounds grim, but the 2 who took their own lives did so in what was considered a clean manner, probably so that someone else wouldn't have to see the horrible things that we all saw so frequently.
Thanks for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any new and terrifying videos.